Cheers, guys. Epix here. Welcome to the VR show. This is episode 16, guys. Yet another tardy episode. We're going to get into that, which is probably a good spot to throw out the reminder for those of you new to the channel. All these episodes have timestamps in the description below. So if you do not want to hear a particular segment, you don't have to. Go to the description below, hit the timestamp for the story that appeals more to you, and boom, you're there. I'm going to get into kind of what's been going on here real quick before we jump back into VR. Want that to be the focus. So yeah, find out what segment appeals. Maybe it's the VR Roundup segment, which is coming up next. That's all the latest VR current events, news in and around the world of virtual reality. The VR XP segment, which is games and experiences in the world of VR. And then finally the VR chat segment. Today we're going to talk about the state of virtual reality, get into some predictions, talk about some realities, both good and bad, and where I think VR is headed for in 2019 and beyond. So if you're still here, let's talk about this briefly. So in my real life, those of you who've watched the channel for a while, you know that I came from the West Coast. We set up shop here on the East. Did our research. There were quite a few jobs in my profession, which is IT management. Things looked pretty good. Got a position when I was here after a few months. That unfortunately didn't work out for reasons probably going to actually make news within the next week. Believe me, we'll talk more on that when and if it does. Suffice it to say, no longer there, and it has been tough. While Vancouver, I could pretty much open up the classifieds at any given time of any given day, and I'd see multiple positions for my trade. Here, there has been one in the last 4 months since leaving my previous employer. One. And I'm the kind of guy, some might say it's arrogant. I just say it's confidence because I know what I can bring to the table for a company. And obviously I shave and clean up. But if I get an interview, I nail it. I usually always will get a position if I can get to the interview stage. The one position that I saw that I applied for, I never even got the interview. So that's been kind of tough. We're going to give it a few more months, and I promised I'm not leaving like I did last time. It just may be sporadic from time to time. Also want to touch on quickly the physical kind of health, and those of you who watched my guest hosting, you probably saw the wisecracks. And believe me, I take them in stride, but they are a wake-up call about the state of my physical being. What the hell happened to Mike? Holy crap, he gained a lot of weight, all that kind of stuff. But it's true. I have gained a lot of weight. Since I broke my ankle in 2014, I haven't been below 200 pounds. I was at 270 something 4 weeks ago. Now I'm back down into the 250s and with a vengeance eyeing 200. So the diet's been revamped. All alcohol, pretty much out except for 1 day a week, and healthy eating and exercise. So there's that's been taking up my time. And then I just wanted to quickly talk about the CLICKBAIT controversy. Among some, you'll see it was probably the most dislikes I'd ever received on a video. I think it was over 10, 12. Look, the way I look at it is, the reality is, making an appealing title makes a difference. If you don't believe it makes a difference, take a look at how that video did to the videos prior. And it's not just views, it's watch time. Significant difference. My thing is, look, a title can be appealing. We can throw around the word clickbait, which I absolutely agree it was, but that still doesn't mean you can lie. And I certainly didn't lie. I would never lie. To me, a title can be appealing, tempting, click-worthy, clickbaity, but it better sure as hell represent the truth. And for that title last week, it sure as hell did. Some people jumped to the conclusion the intended meaning was Oculus as a company with people was no more. The actual truth was the legal name was no more. The title was 100% accurate. people will reach different conclusions. Click on it, watch to find out. I could have been talking about me not liking Oculus anymore, and maybe it was a house cleaning, purging all my Oculus stuff, selling it. There were a lot of meanings that would have been accurate that you could have applied to that. I simply meant the legal name had changed, which is, again, 100% accurate. They are no longer Oculus. Oculus no more. So that's my 2 cents on it. No apologies for that. It helps. It's the reality of YouTube and that damn algorithm. So I'm going to continue to make factual but appealing titles moving forward. All right, guys, let's jump into some virtual reality stuff. Enough of that. We leave that all behind in the intro. We got a lot to cover, so let's get started with this week's VR Roundup. It's an interesting discussion. Dan O'Brien from HTC, of course, their general manager, and David again from Upload VR, talking about the Shadow VR head-mounted display, seeing this as a consumer-friendly device coming in at $400 US, so $399. The problem I have with this device, and look, I love my HTC Vive, I don't see this as a competitor to the Quest. I think it's actually woefully inept spec-wise. You know, to not have 6 degrees of freedom controllers this far into VR, we're talking 3 years, and for a mobile device, just doesn't seem like a sound decision in my books. A couple of other things not too happy about with this device, but as with everything, I'm going to take a wait and look-see attitude. It could still impress me, but at this point, I gotta say, guys, I'm pretty underwhelmed. Speaking of being underwhelmed, I think most of us agree the 2080 and the RTX 2080 Ti, you know, when it comes to being woefully inept, they would probably be placed in that category. I haven't seen anything, guys, that leads me to believe this is going to be a crazy good upgrade for me with my 1080 Founders Edition still. I had hoped the Ti would provide enough of a benefit, not just in VR, but outside of VR for pancake gaming. Just not the case. Well, on the heels of that, NVIDIA announcing their most powerful GPU yet, of course, a Titan product, and you guessed it, the Titan RTX, or T-Rex, which it's affectionately being called by some. Well, I'm going to take a look and wait attitude with this one as well. You know, the usual specs flying around, 130 teraflops of deep learning, 11 gigarrays of ray tracing, which means what exactly? Well, we don't know until we see some real world benchmarks. Features 24 gigs of GDDR6 memory with 672 gigabytes of bandwidth. That's almost a terabyte of bandwidth. Not bad, but again, let's wait and see. And, you know, in case you were in any kind of rush to run out and pre-order this unit, prepare to pony up a crazy $2,500 US. Ouch. This story is a bit more frustrating for me personally. We've talked about attrition and companies falling to the wayside. It is also the subject of this episode's VR chat, so have a listen to that after if interested. Well, IMAX closing down their only European VR center. This is the UK-based center in Manchester's Trafford Odeon Cinema. Well, shuttering down. According to IMAX, the consumer reaction was extremely positive, but the numbers just weren't there. And how could the numbers be there, IMAX, if all you're doing at these centers is recreating the home experience and inserting HTC Vives? What happened to the promise of featuring VR experiences that were unique and that would complement current theatrical releases? Those nowhere to be seen, and yet the locations get shuttered up with, again, the lame excuse that the numbers just weren't there. Does make you wonder, though, what the numbers would have been like had they actually installed what they'd advertised. I discussed this a little bit more in the last VR chat segment of the program, but Acer, who's a 63% majority stakeholder in StarVR Corporation, saying that they may sell or disband StarVR soon. Now, we've seen quite a bit of a shakeup in this market segment. IMAX, which I'll talk about right after this, announcing some interesting news with their only IMAX experience center in Europe, and now this news from Acer regarding the StarVR. What likely had something to do with Acer's decision, probably the primary reason why Acer is responding as it is with regards to the StarVR, is this story back on November the 19th. That came in the gap between episodes. StarVR pricing at $3,200 US for developers, as well as opening up applications again for said developers. My guess is that the response to this was tepid at best and likely did not see many sales at all. Acer, again, being a 63% majority shareholder, not too happy with those results. Well, this update comes during the editing process, guys. December 3rd, news coming in on the story I just talked about. Things not looking well for StarVR creator and VR publisher dev Starbreeze, the Swedish-based company doing the equivalent in Sweden of filing for bankruptcy. They call it reconstruction. They filed that motion in the Stockholm District Court. So it'll be interesting to see where they go. They attribute it to a lot of issues, poor sales for Overkill's The Walking Dead, among, well, we know some of the other reasons. Sad to hear, but looked like the writing was in the wall. Interesting story over on Road to VR. Company called LEMNIS, demonstrating a technology they're calling varifocal lens tech. And what this does is essentially focuses regardless of where you're looking at on the screen. They're basing this on an optic following an Alvarez lens design, which is an optical system invented back in the 1960s by a physicist. It combines two adjustable lenses that shift to serve up a wide range of focal planes. And that's where it differs from technologies like Magic Leap, for example, that only has two. The result, according to a company official, is a smooth change of focus that can cover the whole accommodation range. Been really interesting to see how this technology compare with things like eye tracking and foveated rendering. You know, this is probably the most exciting aspect of VR for me, is just watching the technology unfold literally before us. And to be a part of that, frickin' cool. You gotta love when companies play loosey-goosey with terminology. Take Pimax, for example. To date, if you wanted yourself a 5K or an 8K headset, you'd go over to their website, put in all your information, your address, pick a shipping option, and finalize the order using your Visa or your online debit card, hit submit, and then wait, well, roughly 80 plus days, because this, after all, is just a pre-order and the units are not ready yet. Well, happy days, Pimax announcing this week the end of pre-orders, the beginning of general sales. Well, what does that mean for you, the consumer, as opposed to that first scenario? Apparently not much. You see, after filling in all your information, paying for a shipping option, and then hitting submit, you're still waiting 80 plus days. Terminology's changed, but your waiting time hasn't. Sony confirming that Gearbox's Borderlands 2 VR will be a timed exclusive, according to news sources and precedents, generally half a year to see something like that appear elsewhere. So of course, the hope, fans of Borderlands everywhere, to see this on PC VR within 6 months. That would make for a hell of a good spring/summer. Here's a game that a lot of people have been waiting on, is a Battlefield style experience in VR. This game's called Dust. And look, it's a little rough around the edges still, but a few people who've tried it, including David Jagno over on Upload VR, really are enjoying the game. So I said it's rough. For example, visually, just taking a look at it, and I would agree with assessments of this game looking very late PS2 or early PS3 era. This is not a current gen looking game, but you know what? In VR, a lot of times those type of visuals don't really matter. It's about the immersion, and you can get that immersion in other ways than just through complexity of graphics. Astrobot, a perfect example of that. So interesting game. Check out the Tank Crush here. Definitely one for those of you to try who like this style of game. Full version 1.0 by October or November in 2019. The game is probably going to have a price point of about $25. It's currently in Steam Early Access. It's supported for Rift, Vive, and Windows VR headsets, again, via Steam Early Access. All right, guys, let's talk in today's VR chat about these companies falling to the wayside. I know it's something I've talked about for at least the last couple of years. Since the start of the channel, I've pretty much maintained, look, the reality of the marketplace, it's going to mean there are going to be successful companies and not so successful companies. And in the case of an industry not destined to survive, no survivors. I don't believe that's the case with VR for a second. Although we are seeing stymied growth, we'd all hoped that it wouldn't just be PlayStation VR hitting that 1 million units sold. I think if you would have asked a lot of us at the outset, back in April and March of 2016, when we had all of that excitement about virtual reality launching, most of us would have predicted at least 1 million units, right? Even probably the most conservative estimates were 1 million units almost 3 years later. Sadly, that hasn't come to pass. Instead, what we're seeing is a multitude, a bevy of companies all scrapping it out in this young VR market. Unfortunately, like I just said a few seconds ago, there will be those who are not so successful. And we've been reporting that pretty steadily, right? A lot of the 360-degree camera companies couldn't sustain themselves. And now we're seeing it with VR vendors. Look at Acer. Acer is a company that's dipped into a couple of different VR areas. They've got their own Windows mixed reality unit, and they have a share in StarVR, a 63% share, which is significant. That makes them a majority shareholder, and they've said they are going to be scaling back from that. We also got news over on the IMAX front. That one's a bit more frustrating. I'm going to talk about why I find that one a bit more frustrating, saying that they are closing down their only European location. And I hesitate to call this an IMAX VR experience center because they never, ever frickin' lived up to their original plan. The original plan was to offer virtual reality experiences in a theater environment that were, sometimes synonymous with some of the movies playing theme-wise or thematically, and at other times just providing you with experiences, Mario Kart, that type of thing, like the VR arcades in Japan, in China, experiences you cannot get at home. The idea was great. What went wrong? Well, Put simply, they didn't execute the damn plan. What they did instead of going with StarVR units, more commercial style units, they just dumped a bunch of HTC Vives in there, ended up replicating the home experience with a bunch of Steam VR applications and said, there you go, that's our VR experience. And they wondered why the numbers weren't there, because that was the statement from the CEO saying they've had to scale back because the numbers were not as expected. I wonder what the numbers would have been had you actually marketed this properly and at least at one of the locations, so you could make some type of comparative analysis, actually stuck to your plan. So, little angry, guys, because the frustration here is they've not proved commercial VR doesn't work. They haven't. All they've shown is that replicating the at-home experience in a theater environment doesn't work. And I'm not even convinced they did that properly marketing-wise, but that's a tale for another day. So what are we going to see more of? Well, the Windows mixed reality units, I've mentioned this in a previous episode, they're not all going to see the light of day. And I've had a few people comment, Epics, are you against Windows mixed reality? Hell no. I am pro VR, which means I'm for anything that brings VR to market. I'm rooting them all on. I may not purchase them because I can't purchase all of them, but I'm rooting for them. The next purchases that I'm looking at were to be the Pimax and the Oculus Quest, Facebook Quest, whatever the hell you want to call it. The Quest still on the menu. Sadly, the Pimax, I'm going to shelve that for a little bit. Talked about this in the VR Roundup, and, it's ridiculous. Here they are. They're saying we're no longer doing pre-orders. We're going to open general orders, and they really haven't changed anything. You're still waiting multiple months to get your product. Call it what you want. Perception-wise, it's still a damn pre-order. That is frustrating. Why toy with consumers like that? Why not just be honest? They started out with a lot of honesty. There's been some deception. It's to the point where I can't trust, and it's not that they're not trustworthy, but I don't know that the Survivors of the world or the MRTVs of the world, Sebastian, etc., I can't say to you they got units that were representative of Pimax hardware. I can't say that. There's a possibility that they were, A+ units that they were sent. That is what was reviewed. And unfortunately, if it's got me shy, I'm going to be upfront and say, look, guys, I've changed my mind, like I'm doing right now. And I would urge those of you who've been on the sidelines waiting for a Pimax to do the same. Wait until we get those third-hand accounts. I know I've harped on that a few times, guys, but we're talking about a lot of money. And I'd rather you have that money in your pockets purchasing something like a Quest, right? Maybe you're an HTC person, buy yourself, enhance your tracking solution, buy some games, hold off on the Pimax, wait and see. Let's see if they can pull off 2019. That's where I'm at now. I'm going to review probably at the tail end of the summer. That will have given them at least 6 months from when they supposedly start shipping these en masse, and we can take a look at it then. Not going to jump the gun. Hell no. The Quest, a bit of a different story. It's not as expensive to begin with, and they've been honest in the sense we know what we can expect spec-wise. The only real unknown for me with the Quest is game content. Are we going to see something special at launch? I know they've hinted at it. I'm really hopeful we start seeing some really good killer apps to sell that thing. There's some potential ones that I could point at that I would say should be bundled in there. And I really do think the Quest needs to launch bundled with a bunch of apps and experiences. You're only going to be able to pull off this launch once. Both Oculus Rift and HTC Vive had issues at launch. Even PlayStation VR, sitting there with those million units sold, had issues at launch. So postponing things to do it right is the smart strategy. It appears to be what they're doing. Let's see if they can pull off that launch. Definitely the only unit right now that I'm still entertaining for a purchase in 2019. The rest is a wait and see attitude. And I'd love to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on Pimax, on some of these other units, the Windows Mixed Reality? And remember, I'm coming from a little bit of a different place in that I've already have 4 different VR solutions, albeit the mobile one hasn't been used in many, many months. The other 3 still get regular use. So I'm not wanting for VR, believe me, in any way, but that Quest, very appealing for what it has to offer, is not something I can replicate with any of the other 3 units. And that's why it's still a target device for me in 2019. All right, guys, that's it for this week's VR chat. Again, I want to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts on this, other stories. Where do you think we're at with these companies? Are they finally going to figure out marketing 3 years into this? Or are we going to see the same woeful ineptitude repeated for yet another year? That's my fear. I hope it doesn't come to pass. With that said, though, guys, have a fantastic week, and we will catch you again next week. Guys, as always, cheers.